Welcome back to my channel, guys. In this tutorial I'm going to be sharing with you how I was able to increase my hip measurements from 35 inches all the way to 37 and 38 inches. So I'm just going over to measure my original hip measurements, and I have 35 inches. I am a size 6, your perfect size 6, so I have 35 inches as my original waist measurements. I was able to increase my hip measurements all the way from 35 inches down to 38 inches. If you look at this video very well, you would realize that the hip area looks much more enhanced compared to when I was just wearing my jean trouser. So here my hip measurements had increased to 38 inches. And with this particular one, I was able to increase my hip measurements by 2 inches. So the hip measurements here is 37 inches. I did 2 different samples because I wanted to know which one I wanted. So here I have 37 inches. You might be wondering why I have 37 and 38 inches. I wanted something close to original as possible, something close to my original hip measurements as possible, but still with a bit of a pronounced hip and enhanced hip. And I think I love this particular one right here that I have the 38 inches because the hip area part is much more well defined. The both processes are actually the same thing. The only difference was in the allowances by which I increased my hip measurements. So I'm going to be showing us how you can increase your hip measurements to have an enhanced figure 8. To begin, these are the materials that I worked with. So I have my 1/2 inch foam right here. These are the foams that I used, and the dimension of this foam is 1/2 inch. There are varying dimensions of foam you can procure in the market. You can use 1 inch, but for this project I use 1/2 inch. Let me state here that if you want a much more enhanced hip, I would recommend you go for with 1 inch foam. I also have my other materials here. I have my scissors, marker pen, interfacing. At this point you can use any interfacing of your choice, and the fabric I'm going to be constructing the hip on. I also have my pattern paper that we are going to be using to draft our patterns. The pattern we are going to be working on and modifying is a basic skirt block, and I've gone ahead to place my pattern paper on fold. But before going over to construct my pattern, we need to do some calculations. The dimension of the foam I'm working on is 0.5 inches. I'll multiply that by 4 and that will give me 2 inches. So 2 inches plus my original hip measurement, which is 35, is going to give me 37 inches. So this is going to be the way you would calculate if you are working with a 1/2 inch foam. However, if you are working with a 1 inch foam, you will need to multiply 1 by 4, and that will give you 4 inches, and then add 4 inches to your original hip measurement. So in my case, 4 inches plus 35 is going to give me 39 inches. Okay, so I have 37 and 39 inches. So I'm going to be constructing my skirt pattern with the 37 inches hip measurements. I'm not going to be going into details on how to construct a skirt pattern because I have numerous tutorials on this channel on how you can construct a skirt pattern, and I'm going to be leaving the links in the description box below. I'm done drafting the pattern, and here is what my skirt pattern looks like. The next thing I'm going over to do is I'm going to be cutting this pattern out, after which we can now begin to work on our hip pad. This is what my skirt pattern looks like. So what I'm going over to do is I'm going to be extending the hip line to the other side of my pattern paper. Remember, we drafted this pattern on fold, and that's because we want to extract the hip pad for both the front and the back separately. So I have my full front pattern right here, and then I'm just going over to label. This fold line here is going to serve as a center. I have the center front here, and I'm going to be having the center back here. Disregard any seam allowance, we're just strictly working on the hip pads. So I have B for the back and F for the front. Moving on, I went ahead to mark 1 inch downward from the waistline, and from that 1 inch downward I marked 13 inches downward. This is going to be the length of the foam. This is where I want it to stop. You can take this measurement on your body and feel free to stop at wherever length you want, but you wouldn't want it to be too long. Also on the hip line, I went in to mark 6 inches. So from the 1 inch I marked downward from the hip line, I'll connect it to the 6 inches on the hip line and then connect it to the length of 13 inches. So for the front, you wouldn't want the width of the hip pad to be too wide because you don't want it to be so obvious. For the back, I'm repeating the same thing, 1 inch below the waistline, 13 inches as the length. However, on the hip line for the back, I'm going to be marking 7 inches because the back is wider than the front, so I'm just going over to mark 7 inches. Also, feel free to take this measurement on yourself, especially if you're on the big side, like you're a size 10 and above. So but for a size 6 like I am and a size 8, you can use 7 inches. Okay, so I'm going over to connect all of the dots together, and then this is going to serve as the pattern for the hip foam. Moving on, I'm going to be tracing the pattern for the hip foam on another pattern paper, and this is because I don't want to cut it out from my original pattern. Okay, so if you are okay with cutting yours off from your original pattern, that's fine, but because I want to use this pattern to cut out my skirt pattern, that is why I am tracing the hip foam pattern on another pattern paper. So I'm using a tracing wheel to do this. I'm done tracing out the pattern for the hip foam or the hip part, whatever you might call it. So I'll just go ahead and cut this out. After then, we can now cut this on the foam. In order to cut, guys, I'm going to be cutting this one at a time. I am starting with the back, and I've just gone over to place my pattern on the foam, and I'm going over to cut. So in total, you'll be needing 4 different foams, 2 for the back and 2 for the front. Once I was done cutting, I went ahead to label. So right here I have my side back, and then I'm also going to be labeling on the other side of the pattern, on the flip side of the foam rather, and I have my center back right here, and on the flip side I have my center back. So with this I can decide to place this wherever I want, but you would need to know which is your center back and which is your side back. This will help you to know which one to place on the left side or on the right side of your skirt. So I'm just going over to cut out the other patterns that I need, and I'm also going to be labeling them appropriately so that it doesn't get mixed up. I'm done cutting, guys, and here is what I have. So the way the hip foam is that it's going to be stitched together along the side, so the side back would be stitched to the side front. You can see why it's very, very important to label. And since I've gone ahead to place my patterns together appropriately, I'm going to be labeling this A, and this would be B and B. You can also choose to label left and right, so you know that the left goes to the left side and the right goes to the right side, but A and B is just fine for me. So before or rather the next step I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be shredding the edges along the center front and the center back, and this is because we want to make the edges very thin so that when you wear this, it's not going to be bulging out, it's not going to be giving any, it won't give you away that you're wearing something inside your dress or inside your skirts. So I'm just going over to use my scissors to shred the edges of the center front. Okay, emphasis on the center front. So you're shredding the edges of the center front and the center back, and this is just to thin the edges and make it as flat as possible so that it doesn't bulge out from your dress. I decided to bring the foam closer so that you can see how thin the edges are. Even if you're using a 1-inch foam, you would need to shred. Remember, I am using a half-inch foam and I still shred it, so you can see how flat and how thin the edges are. This will give you a flawless look, trust me. After shredding, the next step would be to cover this with an interfacing, and I'm covering this with an interfacing because the foam is thin, it is half-inch, so the interfacing will serve as structure just to keep the foam in place in case you wash your garment so that it does not rip apart, okay? And it also serves as a medium for you to even stitch them together because there are so many ways you can stitch your hip foams or your hip pads together. So you can use any interfacing of your choice, and I'm going over to use this lightweight interfacing. It's just to give it some sort of structure. All right, so I'm just gone over to place my interfacing on it, and then I'm ironing. While cutting, I added about 0.75 inch allowance all around, and this helped me to stitch the hip pads together. So I'm going to be covering the both sides of the foam. All right, so you're covering the both sides of the foam. I'm done, guys, and here is what I have. The next step would be to join this together, and since I can still see my labelings, all I have to do is to join the side front and the side back together. So make sure you're joining side front to side back together, and since I have an allowance of 0.75 inch, I can do this joining with my straight sewing machine with a straight stitch. However, another option you can use is a zigzag stitch, but for those of us that don't have a domestic sewing machine or any machine that can do a zigzag stitch, this is an alternative for you, and I'm going to be using a straight stitch for this. So I'm going to be sewing along the 0.75 inch allowance which I left around the hip foam, and you're only sewing the side front to the side back together. So this is what I have after sewing. This is what my hip pads and hip foams look like. Yours should look similar to this. You can see that it is already taking shape. Okay, moving on to the next step, I have my skirt pattern right here which I have gone ahead to cut out and also join together by the side. So it's a basic skirt pattern. Watch my tutorial on how to draft a skirt pattern so that you can have the hand of this. So I joined it together by the side and I left the center back open. That's why you can see that it is open right here. Now in order to join, I'm going to be marking about 1 inch downward from the waistline, or rather 1.5 inch downward from the waistline, and I'm going to be picking my hip foam, the one that matches appropriately with the side of the skirt I'm working on. So I'll make sure that the part of the foam that has been marked for the front goes to the front part of the skirt, while the part of the foam that has been marked for the back goes to the back part of the skirt. So the first thing I'm going over to do is to make sure that the side seam of the foam matches well with the side seam of the skirt, and I found out that using my tailor's ham helped make this process really easy to fix because that side is quite curvy. So the tailor's ham kind of serve as a curvy support sort of for this. So you will need to fix your foam firmly along the side of the skirt first of all before going over to the sewing machine to stitch this down. So this is just what I'm doing here. In order to attach the hip foam to the skirt, the first thing I will do is to join it together along the side. I'll stitch it down first along the side, after which I will take it all around so that I can completely secure this hip foam to this side of the skirt. I'm going to be repeating likewise for the other side of my skirt pattern too. So just as for a quick note here, please endeavor to pin your hip pads to your skirt pattern before going over to the sewing machine to sew. Make sure you have placed it firmly in place. Try it on, put it on yourself, make sure it is in the right position before you go ahead and stitch it down, so that you don't struggle while sewing, or you don't have to loosen and do it again. I'm done sewing, and here is what I have. You can see that the hip area is protruding and it is pronounced. So guys, at this point you can join this to a garment you're working on along the waistline, or you can make this into a skirt that you can wear under any garment. Meaning what you have to do is to cover this up with a lining, fix a zipper, and then you can wear this under any dress, so you don't have to make separate hip forms all the time. I'll just go over and stitch the center back down, leaving the zipper allowance open. So guys, we have come to the end of this tutorial. Like I said, you can fix this to a dress, or you can make it as a skirt that you can wear under any garment, so that you don't have to always make a separate hip pads all the time. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure you give it a huge thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, kindly click on the subscribe button below. And until my next tutorial guys, stay blessed.